If you've been following the media lately, there's been reports of escalation in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. On this platform, we break it down. For many years, a myth has been told that the Israel-Palestine conflict is a religious war that dates back in the Bible. Yes, religion is a factor, but not the main factor. Let's backtrack to where this began. The Ottoman Empire, or what is known as the Turkish Empire, controlled much of the Southeast Europe, West Asia, and Northern Africa between the 14th and the 20th centuries, spanning to over 600 years of rule. The place that we know today as Israel and Palestine belonged to the territory that was under the Ottoman rule. During the Ottoman rule, the area was known as Palestine and was mostly Arab, with 87% of its population being Muslim, 10% being Christian, and 3% the Jews. During that time, the area is known to have been relatively peaceful, with Jerusalem being available to all. The people who stayed in that area began to build a national identity, calling themselves Palestinians, and they spoke Arabic, and the dominant population being of Muslim faith. The state of Israel at this point did not exist. Fast forward, in 1916, during the First World War, the Ottoman Empire was on the verge of collapse. The British and the French government, who were so eager to defeat the Ottoman, made promises to the Arab leadership that if you help us to bring down the Ottoman Empire, we will give you land and let you rule independently the Arabian Peninsula and West Asia. The Arab leadership, which didn't want to be ruled by the non-Muslim, non-Arabic leaders of the Ottoman Empire, agreed to that, and thus helped the British and the French to bring down the Ottoman Empire. This is where things start to become interesting. After the defeat of the Ottomans, the Arab leadership is expecting to get land and rule independently as promised. But little did they know that the British and the French had a secret meeting and decided that the captured territories that were promised to the Arab leadership will actually be divided between the French and the British. The British would take Palestine, Jordan, and southern Iraq. The French would take southeastern Turkey, northern Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, which means that the Arab leadership had been tricked, with the British being in control or being the colonizer of Palestine. This is where things became even more interesting. In Europe, a journalist and political activist by the name Theodor Herzl, known as the father of Israel, begins a Jewish political movement known as Zionism. Part of the mandate of the Zionist movement is a belief that Jews should have their own country. The Zionist movement began to lobby for mass migration of Jews in Europe and other parts of the world to move to Palestine and claim that land as theirs. Still at this point, the state of Israel does not exist. So how does the conflict begin? In 1917, since the British were the colonizer of Palestine, they declared the intentions to establish the national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. And this is what is known as the Balfour Declaration. Out of nowhere, the British gifted Palestine to European Zionists. I say out of nowhere because to this day, it is still not clear in historical studies how that decision came about. The Jewish population at this point in Palestine was around 6%. So, from 1920 to around 1940, the British facilitated a movement of the Jews from Europe to Palestine, and the population of the Jews grew from 6% to 30%. This meant that the land that belonged to the Palestinians would be seized and offered to the European Zionist settlers. The Palestinian population began to be unsettled and conflict began, with Palestinians fighting for their land. Still at this point, the state of Israel does not exist. To resolve the conflict, the British government then decided to divide Palestine into two. One side would be for Jews and the other side would be for the Palestinians. The Palestinians rejected the British plan, and together with the Arab League, they took up arms to fight the British government. The British government squashed the Palestinians and the Arab League, killing thousands of civilians. But the Palestinians kept fighting and never gave up. In 1947, The British then realized that the war was becoming too costly, so they began to withdraw from Palestine and handed over the responsibility to the United Nations to deal with the mess. At this point, the United Nations had been established for close to 2 years. So as one of its first mandate was to resolve the conflict in Palestine that was dropped by the British like a hot potato. The United Nations, in its effort to deal with the mess of the British government, proposed to divide Palestine into 2 states, one for the Jews, which we know today as Israel, and the other for Arabs, which we know today as Palestine. At this point, the Jewish population is about 30%, but the proposal gives them 55% of the land in Palestine. The Arabs, again, rejected the proposal because the land is theirs, but the Zionists accepted the proposal. The Zionists, who got 55% of the land, actually wanted more, so their military wing began to capture more lands and chasing away the Palestinians from their homes. The Zionists wanted to capture as much land as possible before the British officially withdraws from Palestine. On the 14th of May in 1948, Israel was born. It was the last day of British occupation. The Zionists declared their portion of land as the State of Israel, becoming the only Jewish nation in the world. On top of the 55% land that Israel occupied, they wanted more and began to encroach into land that was left for the Palestinians. To Palestinians, this was simply a replacement of the colonizer, from the British to the European Zionists. And in so doing, around 2 million Palestinians were displaced and had lost their country overnight. To Palestinians, this was the beginning of war for liberation. It was war against some might call apartheid Israel. This was the beginning of war for land, and that is the conflict that we see today. The Palestinians feel that their war is legitimate and is a war of liberation against Israel occupation. To even call it a conflict could be deemed to be problematic. It is a war against the oppressor. The same could have happened or could have been happening in the African continent because the European Zionists had made intentions to claim some parts of Africa in Uganda and in Kenya as the national home of the Jewish people, meaning that what is happening in Palestine could have easily been happening anywhere in the African continent. What is your opinion? Add your opinion in the comment section. And in the next video, we'll look at the current state of Israel-Palestine conflict.